The ocean holds more secrets than any graveyard on land. Out there, where the waves stretch beyond sight and the horizon swallows the sky, people vanish. They do not leave trails. They do not leave echoes. They slip into silence, swallowed by a black expanse that has no memory and no mercy. Cruise ships, those floating cities of light and music, promise safety and joy, but they also carry a darker reputation, one that few like to acknowledge. Every year, passengers disappear without explanation. Their cabins remain empty, their belongings untouched, but their bodies are never recovered. The ocean keeps them and the ship sails on as though nothing happened. It begins almost always with something ordinary. A figure standing alone on the deck, the sea stretching wide and calm beneath the stars. A woman walking down a hallway lit by pale lights, her footsteps echoing on metal floors. A man leaning against a railing, his drink still cold in his hand. And then suddenly nothing. The figure is gone. The footsteps end. The drink is left behind. When questions are asked, no one has answers. The silence of the sea is louder than any testimony, and the missing are never seen again. There are those who claim these disappearances are accidents. They speak of slippery decks, of strong winds, of passengers who leaned too far over the rail. Others whisper of darker truths, of violence and secrecy concealed by the vastness of the sea. But there are some who believe something else entirely. They say ships carry more than people. They say the sea itself is alive with hunger, that it takes what it wants without leaving signs behind. To stand on the deck at night with nothing but water in every direction is to stand on the edge of something that does not care if you vanish. On one voyage, a passenger swore he saw his friend standing at the railing. The man raised his hand as if to wave, then stepped forward into the dark. No splash was heard. No movement disturbed the waves. When the passenger ran to the spot, the space was empty. The railing stood unbroken, the sea below undisturbed. The friend was never seen again. Later, the witness repeated his words in a voice that shook. I saw him standing there. Then he was gone. The truth is simple, and it is terrifying. Once the sea takes someone, they do not return. Bodies are rarely recovered. Families are left with nothing but unanswered questions and the faint echo of laughter that once belonged to someone who should still be alive. Ships record the disappearance, conduct brief searches, and continue on their route. Vacations resume. Music plays. The casino lights flicker. But in the corners of the ship, whispers spread. People ask themselves who will be next. The ocean is not empty. Sailors have known this for centuries. They spoke of figures that walked the decks at night, of voices rising from beneath the waves, of ships cursed to carry shadows alongside passengers. Modern ships, no matter how luxurious, are not immune to this dread. The walls may be bright with polished wood and shining brass, but in the late hours of the night, when corridors are deserted and the ship hums with the low groan of its engines, the silence feels alive. Every creak of metal, every shudder of the hull, sounds like footsteps in the dark. Imagine standing alone on the upper deck. The air is cool, the stars are hidden behind drifting clouds, and the sea is endless. Behind you, the lights of the ship glow warmly, but ahead of you, only blackness stretches to the horizon. The water does not shimmer. It does not move, it waits. You lean against the railing, listening to the groan of the waves far below. And then you feel it, the sense that you are not alone. You turn, but the deck is empty. You look over the railing, but there is no one there. Still, the feeling lingers, heavy and unshakable, that something unseen is watching, waiting, reaching up from beneath the surface. The haunting fact is this: more people vanish from cruise ships than most will ever know. Their stories are buried beneath entertainment and luxury, concealed beneath the polished image of vacation. For every disappearance reported, there are whispers of others. Passengers who simply never returned to their cabins, whose names were never written on official logs, whose families never received explanations. Some vanish while surrounded by others. Some vanish alone in the silence of night. Each disappearance adds another layer to the question no one wants to face. How does a person vanish completely on a ship that never stops moving? For those left behind, the horror is not only in the loss. It is in the way the sea erases every trace. There are no graves, no memorials, no last words, only silence. A silence that feels deliberate. A silence that feels alive. Those who survive such voyages carry the weight of it forever. They remember the empty chairs, the drinks left behind, the laughter that stopped too soon. They remember the way crew members avoided eye contact, the way the ship pressed forward as if nothing had happened, the way the water glistened with indifference. And when they close their eyes at night, many of them still hear it. The sound of waves against steel. A rhythm that feels less like water and more like breath. It is easy to believe these are only stories exaggerated by fear, distorted by memory. But ask yourself this: how many people must vanish before it becomes more than chance? How many disappearances must be buried beneath excuses before the truth is admitted? And if the truth is something beyond accidents or violence, if it is something older, something that has always lived in the sea, then what hope is there for those who sail across it? The ocean is wide, silent, and merciless. Cruise ships may promise safety and joy, but in the end they are only small islands of light drifting across a vast darkness. And sometimes that darkness reaches out and takes what it wants. Cruise ships are built to dazzle. From the moment passengers step onto the shining decks, they are told they have entered another world, one removed from worry, one floating above the ordinary. Music spills through the halls. Lights shimmer across polished glass and endless food lines the buffets. There is a sense of celebration, of luxury made into motion, as if the ocean itself has been tamed to serve human leisure. Yet beneath the laughter, beneath the clinking of glasses and the glow of chandeliers, lies a truth most try to ignore. The sea does not forget what it is. For centuries, the ocean has swallowed ships whole, pulling them down without warning. Sailors whispered of curses and ghosts long before steel hulls and diesel engines were invented. Entire crews vanished, leaving ships adrift with no trace of life aboard. The sea, they believed, could not be trusted. It was not only storms or pirates they feared, but something more ancient, something that lived in the silence between waves. Cruise ships, no matter how grand, sail across that same silence. Their size and light disguise it, but when night falls and the vastness of the water presses in from every direction, passengers feel it all the same, that they are fragile, that they are far from land, that they are alone. In the early days of luxury liners, newspapers often glorified the journeys. Images of grand staircases, ballrooms glittering with chandeliers, passengers dressed in their finest attire while orchestras played into the night. But alongside those images were headlines that hinted at something darker. Fires that spread too fast to contain, icebergs that tore through steel, outbreaks of illness that spread from cabin to cabin until whole voyages were struck with panic. And then there were the stories that slipped through the cracks, stories of passengers who went missing between ports, their names scratched from the manifest without explanation, their families left behind with nothing but silence. The modern era has done little to erase these shadows. Ships now are larger than entire towns, carrying thousands at a time. They are equipped with cameras, with crews trained for emergencies, with systems designed to keep order. Yet disappearances still occur. People still walk down hallways and never arrive. They still step onto balconies and are never seen again. The records show it plainly. Lives erased in the middle of what should be celebration. And though companies speak of accidents, of chance, of numbers too small to matter, the truth lingers in the hearts of those who sail. The ocean is not controlled. It is only endured. For the families of those who vanish, the pain begins not only with the loss, but with the uncertainty. There is rarely a body to bury, rarely an answer to hold. Instead, there is a cabin left in perfect order, belongings neatly arranged, shoes left by the door. There are half-finished drinks still cold on the table, folded towels untouched, lights still glowing. The scene looks normal, but the person is gone, and no one can explain where or why. Communities have grown around these tragedies, gatherings of families who share the same wound. They trade stories, compare fragments, searching for meaning in patterns that never align. Some speak of last phone calls where voices were rushed and uneasy. Others share photographs that show strange figures reflected in mirrors or glass. They cling to these fragments because they are all that remain. The ocean has taken everything else. For those who return from cruises unscathed, there is often a quiet acknowledgement they do not speak aloud. They remember the corridors that felt too long, the doors that seemed to close on their own, the silence of the deck at night when the sea was black and endless. They remember feeling eyes on them, though no one was there. These are not the things brochures speak of, but they are part of the experience nonetheless. The awareness that the sea is not tamed, that the ship is not immune, that safety is a story told to keep fear at bay. Some crew members admit, when pressed, that the atmosphere changes after a disappearance. Laughter dims, music feels hollow, conversations shift to whispers. Passengers avoid certain corridors, avoid standing alone at the rails. The ship continues forward, but its heart falters. Those who work the ships long enough collect their own catalog of stories. Doors that locked themselves. Cabins where cold air seeped from nowhere. Shadows caught in the corner of an eye that vanished when looked at directly. They do not always believe in ghosts, but they believe in the weight of the sea, and they know it never lets go of what it takes. History has a way of repeating itself, and cruise ships carry that repetition quietly. Each voyage holds the same promise: celebration, escape, luxury. Each voyage also holds the same risk that someone will not return. Whether from human hands, from chance, or from something older, the end result is the same. Silence. Absence. An empty chair at the dinner table. A suitcase that arrives home without its owner. The world rarely notices. News of vanishings is brief, swallowed by other headlines. A few lines in print, a passing mention on television, then forgotten. But for those left behind, the absence does not fade. They carry it like a shadow, heavier with each year. They ask questions no one answers. They imagine last moments they will never know. They wonder if their loved ones fell, if they were pushed, or if something far stranger pulled them away. And so, when people step onto these floating palaces dressed for leisure, smiling beneath lights that seem to promise safety, they are stepping onto something built not only on steel and glass, but on history. A history heavy with tragedy. A history that cannot be erased. Behind the music, behind the laughter, the ocean waits silent and endless. It does not care for luxury. It does not care for joy. It cares only for what it has always cared for, taking what it wants when it wants without leaving a trace behind. That is the truth that shadows every voyage, whether passengers admit it or not. Cruise ships may glitter, but they drift across an ocean that remembers everything. And when the silence rises, when the corridors stretch too long, when the railings gleam in the dark, that memory presses close. Because history is not gone. It is only waiting for the next person to step too close to the edge. The voyage began like any other. Passengers boarded with bright eyes and heavy luggage drawn by promises of luxury and escape. The air buzzed with excitement as announcements rang out across the decks, guiding them to cabins that gleamed with polished wood and crisp linens. Music drifted through wide corridors. The sun glinted off the water, a perfect blue horizon stretching in every direction. It was a floating city of light and movement, cutting smoothly through the waves as though the ocean were nothing more than a painted backdrop. Families posed for photographs on the deck. Couples leaned close to each other, laughing as gulls circled overhead. It was for a time the image of joy, but joy never lasts forever. It begins to fray at the edges long before anyone admits it. On the second night, passengers whispered about noises in the hallways. Not the ordinary hum of engines or the footsteps of crew, but something else. Soft knocks against cabin doors that stopped when opened. Footsteps that trailed too close and then vanished into silence. One woman swore she heard someone speaking outside her door in the early hours of morning, repeating the same word again and again, though she could not make out what it was. When she opened the door, the corridor was empty. As the ship moved further into open water, the unease grew. The lights seemed dimmer at night, the long hallways stretching endlessly, their silence broken only by the faint buzz of electricity in the walls. Some passengers reported seeing figures on the upper decks long after midnight, standing motionless at the railings and staring out into the black water. When approached, the figures were gone. Crew members dismissed these sightings as fatigue, the result of too much alcohol or too little sleep, but those who saw them did not forget. The first major disturbance came on the fourth night. A passenger went missing. He had been seen at dinner with friends, laughing, eating, raising a glass to toast the voyage. Later, a couple claimed they saw him walking toward the open deck, his face pale, his movement slow, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. When the ship docked at the next port, his cabin was searched. His suitcase was neatly packed, his shoes lined against the wall. A book sat open on the nightstand, a folded pair of glasses resting on top. Everything was in order. Everything except him. The crew announced an official search, but the announcement carried no comfort. Rumors spread quickly, as they always do in confined spaces. Some said the man had jumped willingly. Others swore they heard a scream that night, carried by the wind across the deck. Still others believed he had been taken, pulled into a cabin, or dragged below by hands unseen. Whatever the truth, the unease could not be contained. Passengers began to notice small details they had ignored before. A door that would not stay closed no matter how many times it was latched. Mirrors fogging without reason, though no one had showered. Cold air seeping from vents, heavy with the smell of salt and rust, and always the sense of being watched. No one said it aloud, but the tension spread. Laughter grew quieter. Music sounded distant. The pools, once crowded with swimmers, sat empty beneath the heavy sun. The ship continued forward, but its atmosphere shifted. People avoided walking alone at night. They avoided standing too close to the railings. Some cabins remained locked, their occupants refusing to leave except for meals. Crew members, usually cheerful and efficient, looked tired, their eyes darting toward corners as though they too felt the weight pressing in. The illusion of safety cracked, and what seeped through was not only fear of the sea but of the ship itself. Then came the second disappearance. A woman, seen late at night by a family returning from the theater. She had been walking slowly down the corridor, her hand brushing the walls as though guiding herself through the dark. The family reached their cabin, unlocked the door, and turned for one last glance. She was gone. No sound, no trace, only the silence of the hallway stretching on forever. The panic was contained, at least outwardly. Crew members insisted the woman had been mistaken for someone else, or that she had returned quietly to her cabin. But whispers grew. Passengers began sharing stories in hushed tones over meals, describing shadows that followed them, voices that rose in the sound of the waves, faces glimpsed in glass that did not belong to them. The ocean outside seemed darker, heavier, as though it pressed against the windows with deliberate intent. By the sixth night, even those who had not lost friends or family felt it. A collective dread moved through the ship. Some avoided sleep, pacing the decks in silence. Others locked themselves inside their cabins, curtains drawn tight, ears straining for footsteps they could not bear to hear. Every creak of the hull, every moan of shifting metal became a question. Was it the sea or was it something else moving through the ship, unseen but felt by all? The timeline fractured under contradiction. One passenger swore she saw the missing woman on the upper deck hours after she was last reported, her face blank, her eyes fixed on the water. Another claimed to have heard the voice of the missing man calling faintly from below, as though the ocean itself had learned to speak in human tones. Reports contradicted each other, evidence blurred, and still the disappearances remained unexplained. The ship pressed on, the waves stretching endlessly, the horizon swallowing every attempt at reason. In the silence that followed, only one truth became clear. Something had gone wrong on that voyage. Something that could not be explained by chance, by accidents, or by simple human error. And as the days passed, as the passengers counted faces and found them fewer each time, a question grew heavier in every mind. If the sea takes without warning, then how many more would vanish before the ship reached land again? The investigation into the disappearances began with paper and tape. Crew members locked down the cabins, sealing doors with strips of white adhesive as though that could hold back whatever had already slipped through. They cataloged belongings, photographed rooms, and took notes that read more like fragments of nightmares than reports of procedure. Yet even in those dry records, contradictions leapt out. In one cabin, the bed was neatly made, the suitcase folded with care. But the mirror above the desk was cracked down the middle, a long fracture that had not been there during inspection before the voyage began. In another cabin, the passengers' shoes were found arranged side by side near the door. Perfectly aligned, but damp with seawater, though no window was open. Surveillance footage should have provided clarity, but instead it deepened the confusion. In the case of the first missing man, the cameras showed him leaving the dining area, walking calmly down a hallway toward the deck. The angle then shifted, as cameras always do, covering the same space from another direction. In that second feed, he never appeared. The hallway stood empty, though no door had opened, no exit had been taken. It was as though he had stepped out of view of one camera and into nothingness. The second case was worse. The footage showed the woman walking alone, her hand brushing the wall as witnesses described. But her shadow did not match her steps. It lagged slightly, as though it belonged to someone else following just behind her. And then, midway down the corridor, the footage glitched. For less than a second, static filled the screen. When the image returned, the hallway was empty. Her figure never reached the end. Passengers gave their testimonies, each one further complicating the search for truth. A couple swore they heard a scream carried on the wind the night the first man vanished high and sharp, fading quickly into the roar of the sea. Yet others, standing only a few decks away, claimed the night was silent. Another passenger described seeing the missing woman standing at the railing hours after she had supposedly disappeared, her hair moving in a wind that no one else felt. A child whispered that he saw her in the reflection of a window, looking back into the dining hall, though she was not seated inside. The crew collected what little physical evidence remained. A folded note was found wedged behind a vent in one cabin. Its paper was damp, the ink smudged, but a single phrase could still be read: "Do not follow the sound." No one could determine who had written it or when. In another cabin, tucked between the mattress and frame, was a photograph. It showed only a section of the ship's deck at night, the railing faint against the dark sea. But in the corner of the image, blurred almost beyond recognition, a hand could be seen gripping the railing, long fingers too pale, reaching upward instead of down. Experts later weighed in, each offering explanations that satisfied no one. Psychologists spoke of hysteria, of the power of fear in confined spaces, of the human mind reshaping shadows into figures when confronted with endless ocean isolation. Engineers blamed faulty cameras, explaining the glitches as nothing more than technical error. Yet none of these theories accounted for the belongings left behind, for the salt-stained shoes, for the broken mirror that had cracked without sound. And none could explain why those who gave testimony spoke in voices that shook, as if the memories themselves corroded their minds the moment they were spoken aloud. Some investigators suggested foul play, arguing that disappearances at sea often involve violence hidden beneath the veneer of vacation. They spoke of unguarded cabins, of unmonitored stairwells, of the difficulty of securing a ship carrying thousands. But even they faltered when confronted with the contradictions. How could someone have dragged a body through a crowded ship without notice? How could someone commit murder in a hallway lined with cameras, leaving behind no image, no sound, no trace? The more evidence was gathered, the less it seemed like evidence at all. Each piece contradicted another. Each detail made less sense than the last. The cameras insisted on impossibilities. The objects suggested things no storm or accident could explain. The testimonies twisted into a web of shadows and silence. The deeper investigators looked, the more the truth dissolved beneath them, like sand collapsing under waves. One investigator, a man who had worked maritime cases for decades, wrote in his notes something that never made it into the official file. His words were brief, written in jagged strokes that pressed into the page. The ship does not want to be known. Whether he meant the crew, the corporate machinery behind the voyage, or something else entirely was unclear. But his words echoed what many passengers had already begun to suspect. The ship itself was not neutral ground. It was not simply a vessel moving across the ocean. It was part of the silence. In the weeks that followed, the evidence was packed away, stored in boxes that would gather dust in offices far from the sea. Passengers returned home, their memories fractured, their voices uncertain. Families of the missing demanded answers but received only apologies and condolences. And the ship, unchanged, gleaming, prepared for its next voyage, sailed again, its decks polished, its lights shining as though nothing had happened. Yet the fragments remain. Photographs with blurred hands, notes warning against sounds that should not exist. Mirrors cracked without cause. Cameras that showed empty corridors where people had once walked. None of it explains. None of it closes the wound. They are not clues pointing toward a solution, but reminders of the depth of what cannot be known. And perhaps that is the most disturbing truth of all. That every investigation, every piece of evidence, every testimony, only reinforces the same conclusion, that the ocean is not empty, that the ships that sail it are not untouched, and that the silence between the waves will never allow itself to be fully understood. The people left behind did not return to the same lives they had before. For them, the cruise ended, but the silence of the sea followed home like a shadow they could not shake. Families who had waved their loved ones off at the docks now faced the kind of absence that carried no closure. A missing person on land is a tragedy. A missing person at sea is a wound that never heals because the ocean keeps everything it takes. There is no grave to visit, no body to bury, no final place to mourn, only the memory of laughter in a hallway, of a glass raised in a toast, of a voice calling out across the deck. And then nothing. That nothingness became the center of their lives, a hollow that grew heavier with every unanswered question. Some families clung to hope long after the voyage ended. They searched coastlines, contacted officials in distant ports, begged for details that never came. Others turned inward, haunted by the last images they had of the missing. A father replayed the final phone call from his son, analyzing the tone of his voice, convinced he had heard fear hidden beneath casual words. A mother could not throw away her daughter's belongings, leaving the suitcase untouched in the hallway for months, as if the act of moving it would mean admitting she was gone forever. In every case, the silence of the sea bled into the silence of their homes, suffocating, unrelenting, impossible to escape. The survivors, those who had been on the ship when it happened, carried scars of their own. They returned with photographs of smiling faces, of dinners and parties, but behind every picture was the memory of empty chairs, of cabins sealed with tape, of corridors too quiet for comfort. Many admitted they no longer slept well. Nights were filled with restless dreams, visions of water rising against windows, of footsteps pacing in hallways that stretched on forever. Some said they woke in the dark convinced they were back on the ship, the low hum of engines vibrating beneath their skin, the walls pressing closer with every breath. Paranoia became part of their daily lives. A woman who once loved the ocean now refused to live near it, drawing curtains tight whenever she glimpsed the horizon. A man who had worked in high-rise buildings resigned from his job, unable to stand near windows without imagining himself stepping through into endless blackness. Children who had witnessed the unease of their parents carried it forward, fearful of vacations, fearful of travel, fearful of silence itself. The sea had taken people from them, but it had also taken their ability to feel safe anywhere else. Even among those who had not lost loved ones directly, the atmosphere of the ship lingered like a stain. They remembered the way laughter had died out in dining halls, replaced with whispers. They remembered the empty pools, the empty theaters, the way people avoided looking one another in the eye, afraid of what questions might surface if they spoke too openly. They remembered the dread that grew heavier with each passing day, dread that did not vanish even after they stepped back onto solid ground. For many, the cruise became less a memory of vacation and more a memory of slow, shared descent into paranoia. The psychological toll of such events is not easily measured. Official reports spoke in clinical terms: trauma response, adjustment difficulties, anxiety. But these words failed to capture the reality. Reality was a father who sat every night in the dark, staring at the last photograph of his daughter, his face wet with tears that never dried. Reality was a group of passengers who met once a year after their voyage, unable to speak of what they had seen but unable to stay apart, bound together by silence more than memory. Reality was survivors who carried within them the knowledge that something waited out there in the dark, something they could never name but could never deny. Some spoke of voices that followed them home, whispers at the edge of hearing that returned in moments of quiet. Others confessed to seeing reflections of their missing loved ones in mirrors or windows, only for the images to vanish when they blinked. A few claimed they felt hands press against their shoulders at night, heavy and cold, pulling them toward unseen depths. Whether these were symptoms of grief, of trauma, or of something else, they remained real to those who felt them, and their fear did not fade. Communities built around these tragedies carried the weight collectively. Families gathered to share stories, but their voices often faltered, their words dissolving into silence. Some turned to faith, but found no comfort in prayers that seemed unanswered. Others turned to anger, blaming cruise companies, blaming authorities, blaming anyone who might give their grief a shape. Yet beneath every expression, beneath every attempt to make sense, the same wound remained. No answers, no closure, only absence. The ships themselves carried scars as well. Crew members who had worked during disappearances often left their jobs soon after, unwilling to face another voyage. Others stayed, but admitted in private that they felt the atmosphere shift on every journey, as if the ship remembered what had happened and waited for it to happen again. They avoided certain cabins, avoided certain decks at night, avoided speaking of the past except in whispers. For them, the sea was no longer simply a place of work. It was a place of dread, a place that demanded silence. The psychological impact stretched far beyond individuals. It infected entire communities, families, industries. It created a culture of unease around cruise ships, an unspoken understanding that the ocean was not a place of safety. No matter how polished the decks, no matter how bright the lights, the truth lingered. People vanish and the sea gives nothing back. The human mind is fragile when confronted with silence. It searches for patterns, for reasons, for meaning, but when none is found, the silence itself becomes the terror. That is what haunts those left behind. Not only the absence of loved ones, but the absence of answers. The unanswered question is worse than the tragedy itself, because it never ends. It circles endlessly, echoing like waves against steel, wearing down the spirit until only despair remains. And in that despair lies the cruelest truth. The vanishings are not isolated incidents, not rare exceptions. They are part of a pattern, one that repeats itself year after year, ship after ship, voyage after voyage. Each disappearance leaves not only an empty cabin, but an empty life. And those empties multiply, spreading out like ripples across the ocean, pulling more and more into their silence. For those who lived through it, the sea was no longer water. It was memory. It was absence. It was a wound that would never close. When disappearances occur at sea, investigations do not unfold as they would on land. The moment a person vanishes, jurisdiction fractures. The ship may be registered under one flag, operated by a company in another country, and sailing in international waters where no single law reigns supreme. This confusion is where silence thrives. Families demand answers, but authorities shuffle papers between offices oceans apart. What begins as an emergency dissolves into bureaucracy, leaving tragedy to be filed away in incomplete reports. The first theory offered is always the same: accident. Cruise companies insist that most vanishings are the result of carelessness. A passenger leans too far over the railing, a wave strikes at the wrong moment, or alcohol clouds judgment. It is an easy explanation, comforting in its simplicity, and it allows ships to continue their voyages without disruption. But accident does not explain everything. It does not explain belongings left neatly arranged in cabins, shoes placed side by side at doors, or the absence of screams when a body falls into water that amplifies sound for miles. It does not explain the strange gaps in surveillance footage, or the testimonies of those who swear they saw someone moments before they vanished into nothing. Accident accounts for some perhaps, but not all. The second theory, darker, is that of foul play. Crimes at sea are not uncommon. Thousands of people confined to a floating city, alcohol flowing freely, tempers and desires unchecked. Violence festers in such conditions, and sometimes it erupts. There are stories of passengers pushed over railings, of arguments that ended with hands gripping throats, of secrets buried in the silence of the waves. Some investigators believe these vanishings are murders concealed by the perfect accomplice, the ocean itself. With no body to recover, with no crime scene but endless water, evidence dissolves in minutes. A shove, a splash, and then nothing. The sea does the rest. Yet foul play too fails to cover every detail. Cameras fail at the exact moment of disappearance. Witnesses contradict one another. Artifacts are found in places that should not be possible. A note left in one cabin warns against following a sound. A photograph captures a hand that seems to reach upward instead of down. These fragments do not fit neatly into the story of crime. They suggest something less human, something harder to name. And so the third theory emerges, whispered late at night by both passengers and crew, the possibility of something paranormal. For centuries, sailors told tales of ghosts aboard ships, of voices in the fog, of phantom vessels that appeared and vanished without warning. Cruise ships, no matter how modern, sail across the same waters where legends were born. Some believe that when tragedy strikes at sea, it does not fade. It lingers, attaching itself to steel and wood, feeding on the fear of those who sail across it. According to this view, ships become haunted archives, carrying not only passengers but the weight of all who were lost before. Those who believe in this theory point to the evidence most others ignore. The footsteps heard in hallways where no one walks, the cold air that seeps into cabins despite sealed doors, the shadows on cameras that move when passengers do not. They argue that these are not coincidences, but signs that something older than human memory lingers in the silence between waves. The ocean, they say, is not empty. It is filled with memory, with sorrow, with presences that watch from beneath the surface and reach up when the opportunity arises. Investigations into these vanishings often avoid such explanations, yet the contradictions cannot be erased. In one case, a security officer admitted off record that he heard his own name whispered in the empty corridors at night, spoken in the exact voice of his late brother. In another, a passenger described seeing a pale figure walk through a closed door and vanish. These accounts never reach official reports, but they circulate among crew and survivors, building a legend as strong as any evidence. A fourth theory, rarely spoken but always present, suggests something more sinister, that the ships themselves are complicit. Not haunted, not cursed, but designed in ways that conceal the truth. Doors without alarms, blind spots in camera coverage, logs that can be altered without detection. Some believe cruise companies know more than they admit, that disappearances are smoothed over to protect profit and reputation. A person vanishes, the ship continues, and the story is swallowed by silence long before it can reach the public. In this theory, the true horror is not supernatural but human, a system built to erase those who vanish and to ensure that no one ever truly finds out why. But even this theory has cracks. If corporate concealment explains paperwork and silence, it does not explain the testimonies of survivors who claim to have seen impossible things. It does not explain the notes hidden in cabins, or the way multiple witnesses describe the same figure standing at the railing long after the missing were gone. No single explanation fits. Each theory explains part of the truth but leaves something else unanswered. And so the investigations continue, each one incomplete. Reports are filed, but they read more like shadows than facts. Families push for answers, but their voices fade against the indifference of companies and the endless silence of the sea. Experts argue in circles, accident, crime, paranoia, haunting, but no one can resolve the contradictions. The truth remains fractured, broken across testimonies, buried beneath waves that do not return what they take. What remains is unease. The knowledge that none of these explanations bring comfort, because each one carries terror of its own. If the vanishings are accidents, then anyone can be next, a single misstep away from erasure. If they are crimes, then killers walk the decks unnoticed, shielded by silence. If they are paranormal, then the ships carry more than passengers, and no amount of luxury can protect against what waits in the dark. And if the ships themselves are complicit, then the horror is not the sea at all, but the hands of those who profit from it. No theory closes the wound. No investigation resolves the questions. The silence remains, stretching across the decks, across the families, across the ocean itself. And in that silence, the question grows heavier. If truth cannot be found, then what truly waits for those who step onto these floating cities of light? And why does the sea always demand a price? Cruise ships glitter with light, but light does not erase shadow. When the parties end, when the music fades, when passengers retreat to their cabins and only the endless sea remains, the silence takes over. It is in that silence that truth waits. Not the truth printed in brochures or spoken in safety announcements, but the truth no one wants to face. The ocean is not an escape. It is a void, and voids demand to be filled. Every disappearance is recorded but not remembered. Numbers on a file, initials on a manifest, entries buried in archives far from the sea. Yet for every name reduced to ink, there is a family left behind, staring into the hollow absence of someone who boarded a ship and never came home. The pain of that absence stretches beyond grief. It becomes a question that corrodes the mind. How can a person simply vanish? Where do they go? And why does the sea take so easily, without resistance, without leaving proof behind? The cruelty of it lies not only in the vanishing, but in the way the world continues. The ship sails on, its engines rumbling, its lights shining. Passengers continue their meals, their games, their conversations. A chair is empty, a cabin is sealed, but the voyage does not end. Life presses forward, and the silence of what has been lost deepens with every passing mile. That is the essence of horror at sea, not only the act of disappearance, but the way it is absorbed into the machinery of routine, concealed beneath music and laughter, as though absence itself can be smoothed over. Some claim these vanishings are accidents. Others believe they are crimes. Still others insist the ships themselves are haunted, cursed, or worse. But none of these explanations bring peace because none resolve the feeling that spreads across passengers each time it happens. That something larger is at work, something that cannot be confined to human reason. The ocean is not merely water. It is history, it is memory, it is hunger. To sail upon it is to drift across a graveyard without borders. Consider the silence of the decks at night, the hum of engines beneath the feet, the faint echo of waves breaking against steel. In that silence, passengers often admit they feel it, the sense of eyes on them, the sense of a presence pressing closer. They tell themselves it is imagination, that the sea does not watch, that ships do not remember. But then another person vanishes, and the silence feels less like absence and more like intention. The truth may never be known. Perhaps people fall and are swallowed by waves. Perhaps violence hides in corners the cameras do not see. Perhaps something older, something nameless, lingers in the water, reaching upward with hands no one can see. Or perhaps it is all of these things at once. Human cruelty, human error, and something far darker, interwoven into the silence of the sea. What remains certain is this: the vanishings do not stop. They repeat year after year, ship after ship, voyage after voyage, and with each one the fear grows, not only for those who sail, but for those who remember. Survivors who step off the ship carry the silence with them. Families who wait on shore carry it into their homes. Even those who only read about it feel its weight because the question cannot be escaped. How can a person be surrounded by thousands and still vanish without a sound? That question lingers like a wound that never heals. It is what makes these stories more than tragedies. It is what makes them haunt. For the ocean offers no final words, no final images, no last embrace. It offers only absence. And absence is infinite. The luxury of cruise ships is a fragile illusion. Beneath the lights, beneath the music, beneath the laughter lies a truth as cold as the water itself. No one is safe from silence. The railings gleam, the cabins shine, but the sea does not care. The sea does not forgive. The sea does not return what it takes. So the next time you imagine yourself standing on a deck at night, picture it clearly. The horizon stretches unbroken. The wind carries the salt of endless miles, and the dark water waits below. Behind you, voices fade into sleep. Ahead of you, only blackness. You lean against the railing, feeling the ship tremble beneath you, and you tell yourself you are safe. But then the thought arrives, uninvited, heavy as stone. If someone were to vanish at this very moment, if they stepped forward and were gone, what proof would remain? Who would know? Who would believe? The sea would know. The ship would know. And you would carry that silence forever. Ask yourself this: when the next name is added to the long list of those who never returned, will the explanation comfort you? Will it matter whether it was accident, crime, or something far older? Or will the truth remain the same? That the ocean is not empty, that silence is not safe, and that once the sea takes, it never lets go? The story ends here, but the silence does not. It waits, stretching across the waves, stretching across the steel decks of ships that still sail, stretching into the minds of those who dare to listen too closely. The next time you step aboard, the next time you lean against a railing or walk a corridor alone at night, remember this: the silence is watching, and it may already have chosen who it will take next.